Have you ever had that feeling, when you finally achieve something you've been working so hard for, that moment of like pure triumph, but then, I don't know, it just sort of fades?
It's almost like a letdown, isn't it?
It is. It's like, is that all there is? It really makes you wonder about this whole idea of happiness. Like we're always told it's the ultimate goal, the thing we should be striving for. But what if it's like fundamentally flawed?
It's a really interesting question, and it's something that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. I mean, think about it. We've built entire societies around this idea of pursuing happiness, but there's a part of us that still feels this nagging sense of dissatisfaction.
Right. Like deep down is this constant striving for happiness, this kind of perpetual joy. Is it even possible? It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It is, and that's exactly what we're going to be diving into. So recently we came across this YouTube video, Astral Drift, and it really got us thinking about some of these big questions.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mind bender, but it's full of these fascinating insights from like Plato, Machiavelli, Nietzsche.
And we wanted to sort of unpack some of these ideas and, maybe offer a different way of looking at this whole thing, this whole idea of happiness.
Yeah, and this was something that really resonated with me from the video. Like, maybe our brains aren't actually wired for constant bliss. I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. If you're constantly in a state of euphoria, you're probably not going to be very good at, surviving.
Exactly. You wouldn't be very alert to danger. You wouldn't be motivated to do the things that are necessary for survival. And that's where this concept of the hedonic treadmill comes in.
Oh, yeah. That was a big one in the video.
Yeah. And this is essentially the idea that we have this baseline level of happiness. And no matter what happens to us, good or bad, we tend to return to that baseline. So, we get that promotion we've been working for.
Yeah.
There's that initial rush of excitement, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing.
But then after a while, it just becomes the new normal. The excitement fades and we're back to our base.
It's so true. It's like with everything, a new relationship, a new car, that new phone smell, like whatever it is that you're really desiring, you finally get it, but the buzz is temporary.
Right. And that's because of this thing called set point theory. Basically, the idea is that we all have this kind of genetically determined level of happiness.
Oh, interesting.
And while, certain life events can cause us to deviate from that set point, we have this really strong tendency to return to it. And there's some really fascinating research that backs this up. Like they've done studies on lottery winners.
Wow. Okay.
And they find that after that initial euphoria of winning all that money, they often end up right back where they started. Happiness-wise.
Huh. So it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Right. And it's the same thing with people who experience tragedy. There's this incredible resilience in the human spirit. People often adapt and return to their baseline level of happiness over time.
It's kind of humbling, isn't it? Like all that effort, all that striving, and our brains are basically saying, yeah, nice try, but we're going back to where we were.
Yeah. It's like we're on this treadmill and we keep running and running, but we're not actually getting anywhere.
We're not moving forward. It's tough. But this idea that true happiness is kind of elusive, well, it's not new, right? Didn't Plato talk about this?
Oh, yeah, he did centuries ago. And he actually has this really powerful metaphor for it called the allegory of the cave. So imagine you're a prisoner in a cave and all you've ever seen are these shadows on the wall. You have no idea that there's this whole world outside the cave.
It's dark.
Right. And so you mistake these shadows for reality. And Plato's point is that many of us are living like those prisoners, mistaking these fleeting pleasures, these shadows, for true knowledge and true fulfillment.
Oh, I see. So when we're chasing those likes on Instagram.
Exactly. Or that temporary high of buying something new. Plato would say we're essentially living in the cave, mistaking the shadows for a reality.
That's deep. It really makes you think about what we're prioritizing.
It does. Now, Nietzsche had a slightly different take on it. More challenging, perhaps.
Yeah, Nietzsche. He's always intense. So what did he say about happiness?
Well, he basically said that happiness isn't something that we should be directly pursuing. It shouldn't be the goal itself.
Oh, interesting.
Instead, he saw it as a consequence, like a byproduct of something else, of growth, of struggle, of overcoming challenge.
So it's not about avoiding pain. It's about embracing it.
Exactly. He talked about this idea of amor fati.
Amor fati, yeah, that was in the video.
Yeah, and it essentially means love of fate. So instead of constantly trying to avoid the difficult stuff, the painful stuff, Nietzsche was saying that we should actually embrace it because it's through those challenges, those struggles, that we actually grow and evolve.
Huh. So maybe all that stuff we're trying to avoid, all those uncomfortable feelings, maybe they're actually the key?
That's what Nietzsche would argue. And then there's Machiavelli. He brings a totally different perspective to this conversation.
Yeah, Machiavelli, well, let's just say he was a bit of a realist. What do you have to say about happiness?
Well, he was all about power. He saw the world as this game of power dynamic. And he believed that the idea of happiness could be used as a tool for control.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he observed that those in power, they often use the promise of happiness, or they manipulate people's desire to maintain control, to keep people in line.
Oh, so it's not about making people truly happy. It's about
creating the illusion of happiness, the promise of happiness, as a way to control the masses.
I never thought of it that way. That's scary.
It is a bit unsettling because it makes you question everything, doesn't it? Like all those messages we're bombarded with about what will make us happy, buy this product, live this lifestyle. Is it really for our benefit, or is it just a way to keep us
trapped?
Yeah. Trapped in this system.
This is heavy stuff. And the video touches on this idea of manufactured desire too, right? The idea that we don't even really know what we want anymore because it's all been
implanted in our minds.
Exactly. It reminds me of that experiment that Benjamin Libet, I think, where they showed that brain activity actually precedes conscious decision making. Like our brains are making choices before we even realize it.
Yeah, it's wild. It basically suggests that our sense of free will might be a bit of an illusion. Like we think we're making these choices, but maybe our brains have already decided.
I don't even know what to think anymore.
It's definitely mind-bending. And then you add in the power of repetition. The more we're exposed to something, whether it's a brand, a political slogan, whatever, the more likely we are to accept it.
Like brainwashing.
Kind of. They call it the mere exposure effect. And it's everywhere. In advertising, in politics, on social media, we're constantly being bombarded with messages. And over time, those messages start to seep into our subconscious and shape our...
Which brings us right back to Machiavelli, right? Like if you can control people's desires, you can control them.
Exactly. And Plato had this concept called the noble lie. Basically, the idea that sometimes it's necessary for those in power to tell lies.
Lies. To benefit themselves, you mean?
Not necessarily. Plato believed that these lies could actually be beneficial for society as a whole, like these carefully crafted myths that would help maintain order and harmony.
Okay, so like white lies.
Kind of, but on a much larger scale.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It is, and this brings up a really important point, though. We need to question the stories we've been told about success, about happiness, about what a good life looks like. Because a lot of those stories, well, they might not actually be true.
They might just be noble lies.
Exactly. And Nietzsche would argue that we need to go through this process of reevaluating all our values, like really questioning everything we...
But that's got to be tough, right? Like to challenge those fundamental beliefs that we've held on to for so long.
It can be really uncomfortable, but it's also incredibly liberating because it allows us to break free from these cages of thought and to create our own values, our own meaning.
To really define ourselves, right? But the video takes this even further, doesn't it? It even questions the idea of the self, like who we are.
Yeah, that's where things start to get really mind-bending. The video introduces this idea that the self, like the you that you experience, isn't actually this fixed, stable entity, but rather it's this fluid, constantly evolving narrative.
It's like we're making it up as we go along.
In a way, yeah. Our sense of self is constructed from our memories, our emotions, our perception. But the problem is those things aren't always reliable.
Especially memory. I mean, we've all had those moments where we're like, wait, did that actually happen? Or did I just imagine it?
Exact. Memory is so fallible. It's constantly being reconstructed, and every time we recall a memory, change, be distorted. And sometimes we even create false memories that feel completely real.
Whoa. So like our past is basically an illusion.
In a way, yes. And Nietzsche actually warned against clinging too tightly to this idea of a fixed identity. He saw it as a limitation, a cage that prevents us from truly growing and evolving.
So we're not who we think we are. This is a lot of process.
It is. And, Machiavelli, being the pragmatist that he was, he probably understood the power of this illusion of self. Because if people believe that they have this stable, unchanging identity, then they become much easier to predict.
Okay, so let's recap. Our thoughts might not be our own. Our past is an illusion. Our identity is constantly shifting. Happiness is what? A lie. It's a lot.
It is. But there's also a sense of freedom in all of this. Because if all of these things are true, then it means that we have the power to change them.
We can rewrite the story.
We can. We can choose our own thoughts. We can create new memory. We can redefine who we are. And ultimately, we can create our own.
It's both terrifying and liberating at the same time.
It is, and the video uses Plato's allegory of the cave to illustrate this point. Most people, they never even question the shadows on the wall. They just accept them as reality. But once you step outside the cave, once you see the world for what it truly is, never.
And that's when the real journey begins.
Exactly. And that journey includes confronting our shadow selves.
Our shadow selves?
Yeah, this is a concept from Carl Jung. And it basically refers to those parts of ourselves that we try to hide. Dark side, the negative thoughts, the impulses that.
So it's all the stuff we don't want to admit we have.
Exactly. And the more we try to suppress those parts of ourselves, the more power they have.
So we need to embrace the dark?
We need to at least acknowledge, integrate it, because it's a part of who we are. And denying it only makes it strong.
I'm starting to understand. But doesn't that make us bad people?
Not necessarily, it just makes us human. Machiavelli believed that those who deny their own darkness are actually the most dangerous because they end up projecting it onto others.
Oh, so like it's better to acknowledge our own flaws than to pretend we're perfect and then judge everyone else.
Exactly. And Plato actually warned about this too. He said that those who don't understand their own minds become slaves to them.
It's like we need to become masters of our own mind.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to spend time in solitude, in silence, because that's when we're forced to confront those to really face ourselves.
That's deep. But now we're back to like this whole idea of happiness. If it's an illusion, then what's the point of anything?
That's the ultimate mind break, isn't it? Like if we strip away all the illusions, what's left? But the video actually suggests that happiness isn't something that we find, it's something that we create.
We create it. How?
Well, remember, if our thoughts, our past, our identity, they're all fluid, then that means we have the power to shape them. And that includes our happiness.
So it's not about chasing some external thing. It's about
an internal shift. It's about choosing to focus on the positive. It's about finding gratitude in the everyday moment. It's about, creating a life that is aligned with our values.
And wasn't that kind of Nietzsche's point with the whole Übermensch thing? Like creating your own values.
Exactly. He believed that the true measure of a person is their ability to create their own meaning, to rise above the herd mentality.
And Machiavelli would probably say that we should be strategic about it.
Oh, absolutely. If happiness is a construct, then why not construct it in a way that benefits, in a way that is aligned with our goals and our values?
It's all starting to click now, but it's still a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but it's also incredibly empowering because it means that we're not just victims of circus. We're not just pawns in some cosmic game. We have the power to choose. We have the power to create. We have the power to be happy.
Wow, that's amazing.
And this brings us back to Plato's cave. The people who are still trapped in the cave, they're never going to experience true happiness because they're too busy chasing shadows. But once you step outside the cave, once you see the world for what it truly is, that's when you realize that true happiness comes
from understanding ourselves.
Exactly, and from taking control of our own mind.
This has been intense, but also really eye-opening.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. So I guess the question now is, what do we do with all this information? How do we actually apply it to our lives?
That's the real challenge and the real journey. But it all starts with awareness, with questions, with being willing to step outside of our comfort zone and to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world.
To step out of the cave.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today.
We have.
So to everyone listening, we've thrown a lot of ideas your way, some pretty mind-bending stuff, but now it's your turn. What do you think? What resonates with you? And most importantly, how are you going to use this new perspective to create your own happiness?
Because ultimately it's up to each of us to define what happens and to create a life that is truly fulfilling.
That's a great place to end it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.